If you've got 30 minutes, you can make art. Learn to paint watercolor daisies in this real-time painting tutorial. Let's do a really quick supply rundown. For this mini painting, you'll want a small piece of paper, something like a 5x7, and look for 140-pound cold pressed. You'll also want a small round brush, something like a number 3 or a number 4. For paints, I am using my 48-pan set from Muño. I have 2 glasses of clean water, paper towel for blotting my brush, and some washi tape. Remember, all of my supplies are linked in the video description. And here are the paint colors that I'll be using to complete this painting. Raw sienna or yellow ochre, a brown like Van Dyke brown, a warm green such as olive green or olive brown, a dark cool green like deep phthalo green, a gray such as Payne's gray or French gray, and finally a dark blue such as indigo. With your paints mixed up, let's talk about our painting project today. We're going to do this in real time, and the first step is simply to block off a small area, really small. This is mini. Mine is about 2 by 3 inches. Okay, let's begin our painting. This is in real time, so it should be easy to follow along with. I have a little French gray on the end of my round brush, and I'm almost using it like a pencil and just sketching a circle that marks the middle of the flower or the stamen. Then I'm going to grab a little bit more paint, and we're going to paint this flower one petal at a time. I start with kind of a wide, larger brush stroke. That indicates the shadow on the petal. And then I continue sketching with the tip of the brush, and I draw in the remainder of that petal. And I always paint daisies the same way. I go around the stamen and I paint them one petal at a time, starting with that wide, thick brush stroke for the shadow, and then using the tip of the brush to draw in the remainder of that petal. And there I've done 3 now. And they're all a little bit different in size and shape. As I go around here, you'll see some of the petals come to a point at the end. Others end in sort of a rounded or squared off edge. So I'm going for that perfectly imperfect look. I say this in so many videos, but the reason I love painting botanicals or things from the natural world is because those items are perfectly imperfect. You want them to look organic. And so doing these really fluid movements with your brush results in hopefully a subject on the paper that looks organic and perfectly imperfect. And for that reason, looks, like it should, if that makes sense. And so all of these petals are a different size and shape. Now, the reason I'm keeping the petals at the front or bottom of the daisy a little bit shorter is not just to make them all different, but it also helps with a bit of foreshortening, helps with that look of depth and perspective, and it's giving my daisy a more concave look. So that's why I've done that. Now that I've filled in the entire daisy, I've got petals going all the way around. What I can do now is I can leave it alone, or I can add some sort of secondary petals peeking out from behind those first ones. This is a good trick if you have a weird gap where you come to the end, just add a few more petals poking out from behind. I just sort of draw them in again with the tip of the brush, maybe add a little extra shading. And at this point, I've almost got my first daisy entirely blocked out. This is the main daisy. I've placed it sort of in the center of the left side of my little rectangle. And I'm going to do 2 more smaller daisies, but my main subject matter is now in place. I like the way it looks. And we'll move on and we'll paint 2 more, but they're going to be a little smaller. So the second one, I start the same way, just sketching that little circle where the stamen will sit. And then this one's on a bit more of an angle. So we're just going to paint it the same way, 1 petal at a time, thick brush stroke for the shadow, and then filling in and outlining the rest of the petal, the remainder of the petal. And this one is only going to have a semicircle of petals because it is on an angle. So I think with this one, I'll call it. We could have a few little petals kind of poking out on the other side of the stamen, but I sometimes kind of mess those ones up. So I think I will leave that alone and move on to the final flower. Just as we've done before, we are going to mark out a circle at the center of the flower, and then we're going to go around one petal at a time to complete this last daisy. Now, I do want to keep these second and third flowers a little smaller, so make sure that your petals don't get too long because you don't want the painting to be all flower. We're going to do a really pretty background, so just try to keep this one a little bit tinier as you work your way around. Okay, now that the flowers are done, let's move on and talk about the background. We're going to create a really easy yet beautiful backdrop. And the way we're going to do it is with a little wet into wet. So what I'm doing here is using just water to wet the entire bottom left corner of my painting. And then I take some of the greens that I already have mixed up on my palette and I just release them into that wet area. So I started with the olive green, then I grabbed the phthalo green, and they're just blending and blurring and moving onto the paper really beautifully because the paper is wet. So the pigment will go anywhere where you have wet the paper. It will not move on to an area that is dry. But the one thing you want to think about is that you don't want the paint to start drying because that can create harsh dry lines. So the nice thing about this is that it's mini, so you don't have a large surface area to worry about, but we just want to move quickly and purposefully, not rushing, but just purposely moving through this little area and filling all of it in with our greens and maybe even grabbing a little bit of that indigo as well. Now, this is when your round brush comes in really handy because you're going to see me use the belly of the brush to, put down a large area of color like I just did in the bottom right there. But you're also going to see me using the tip, the delicate fine tip of that brush to go around and paint the perimeter of each daisy. I want the green to touch those daisies and for each flower to have a nice detailed edge. I don't want these flowers to start looking cartoony at this point. I don't want the edges to be perfectly smooth or rounded off. So I really need to go around and carefully fill with my dark greens all along the perimeter of each flower, while at the same time laying down this beautiful, messy, watery, blurred backdrop. So yeah, that's why I love the round brush. The belly of the brush holds lots of paint so that you're not constantly going back to the palette and reaching for more. And you can do large swashes of color, wide brush strokes, big movements, but you've got this nice fine point so that you can also paint really delicate areas like in between little daisy petals. And one thing you saw me do there is that on the flowers, you want to take the green right up to the stamen in at least one or two spots. You really should be able to see through the petals in at least one spot. So make sure that the green kind of touches right into the center wherever you think it would look nice. And that's going to make those flowers appear a little more natural and realistic. And it will help to keep them from looking cartoony. As I move around the painting and continue adding the wet into wet backdrop, I'm grabbing from both greens, and now I'm starting to pick up a little bit of that indigo blue as well and let that mix in. It looks really pretty, and this is just a really effective and simple way to get a very painterly quality in your little mini painting. That wet into wet, it gives the look that our backdrop is blurred and slightly out of focus, almost like a photograph. And then when we begin to add detail, to that portion of the painting, details being things like the stems and the leaves, we don't have to make all of them in sharp focus either. Some of those items or those subjects can be a little blurred, and it's going to look very sophisticated and painterly, as I said, yet it's going to be really simple to achieve that look. So as I also mentioned, I'm just moving purposefully and quickly through this section of the painting because I don't want any harsh dry lines to form. Anywhere that the green dries, you could have a harsh line forming. And if a line forms right up against the flower or the edge, that's fine. But if it forms right in the middle, that's maybe not so good. So we're just kind of keeping everything wet as we move. And this is one of those things that takes a little practice. You want everything to be wet, but not too wet so that it's out of control. But just give yourself some time to learn, how much water you need on the paper, how much water you need in the brush. That's not something I can give you an exact amount of. I wish I could. It'll just come with time as you learn and grow into your painting practice. If you do it, once a week, or even if you're just doing this once a month, your hands are going to learn the feel of the brush, and you're just going to know how much water you like to have in that brush and that sort of thing. So just enjoy your practice, and I promise the skill will come. The main thing is that you enjoy this creative time. And if you need to wet an area that you've already painted to help with that look of blurring, that's totally fine. Just watch out for blooms forming. And if you don't know what a bloom is, that's okay, no worries. I actually have a watercolor e-course. It's available on my website, and it gets into all of the basic techniques, and we focus on watercolor flowers. It's really nice if you're getting started with watercolor and you feel like when you're watching these videos, you have a lot of questions. Head over to my website to read the course syllabus and see photos of what you'll be creating as a student. If you purchase the course, you'll have lifetime access to the over 25 videos so that you can go back and rewatch again and again and practice along with me. Now that the backdrop is filled in with green, I want to continue adding to it by placing some stems and leaves. And it's great at this point if portions of your backdrop are still wet, because when you start to add those stems and leaves, they're going to blend and blur a little bit, and they're going to contribute to that look of everything being a little bit blurred, a little bit bokeh, a little bit out of focus. And that can really contribute to that painterly, sophisticated quality of this piece. If you need to wet the backdrop slightly, that's okay. Just be careful with that, as I mentioned. And if you're painting leaves and stems on dry areas, that's okay too. That's actually great for some of the leaves to be in really sharp focus and for some to be blurred. That's what we want. So up here at the top, I've got a nice dry area, so my leaves are going to be very precise. Anytime we're putting wet paint on a dry surface, wet on dry is great for precision work. Your paint is not going to move. And anytime we're putting it on a wet surface, that wet into wet or wet on wet, we're going to get a little more blending and blurring, and that's a good thing too. The main thing here is that we're using them to our advantage as the artist. So you see, I'm trying to fill in the entire backdrop with lots of little messy, scraggly daisy leaves, and I'm sort of hinting at little stems and branches in some areas. So just doing kind of messy, long brush strokes, or even just hinting at little pieces of leaf. Just have fun with this and see what you come up with. I wouldn't say that background is totally done, but I want to move on and add some yellow to the center of my flowers. And I do that by typically just placing a little blob or dot of yellow, and then I wipe my brush and I just kind of blend and bleed that yellow out so that I don't get too much paint on there. I can wet my brush, and then with a little bit of damp water, a little bit of a clean wet brush, I can just kind of blend out my yellow ochre, and that way I've got kind of a dark area and a lighter area of the stamen. I'd also like to continue working on the daisies by picking up a little bit more of that gray. If you want to darken it slightly, you can add a little bit of indigo to it, and that'll darken it beautifully. Just don't add too much. You don't want it looking like blue-gray. And with a little bit of that dark gray on the tip of our brush, we can add a bit of shading to our daisies. We really want to make them pop now. So I start normally by just adding some tiny little lines near the center of the daisies. That helps with that concave look. As we know, the daisy is sunken towards its center. So by placing some shadow lines there, we make it look like the light just wouldn't hit there as easily. There'd be a little bit of shadow there. We can also place some tiny lines along the length of some of the petals, and that helps to contribute to the look that the petals are not perfectly smooth. Some of them have a little bit of texture. You can also add shading on the secondary petals, those ones that are peeking out from underneath the first round. Those ones the light would not hit as easily as well. So you can add some extra gray on those ones if you like, and this is really going to make your daisies pop. You don't want to overdo this. Go light and add a little bit at a time. Kind of keep stepping back, asking yourself, does that look natural? You don't want to end up with dark gray blue daisies, okay? But just take your time and adding that little bit of shading. It's actually going to make the flower appear not only more realistic, but more white. Next up, I want to add some lowlights to the stamens at the center of each daisy. And I do that by taking a mix of that yellow and brown, and I'm just dotting around the edge of each stamen. That gives a nice low light, and it leaves a highlight towards the center or top of the stamen. And that's just a really easy way to add some depth at the center of each flower. With that done, I'm going to move on to completing the green area or the background. I'm going to put a little bit of indigo into my green. You can even add more brown. You want to get a real nice dark green now. And we're going to make sure that each daisy has a stem that you can identify that is not blurred, that looks like it is attached to the flower. And we might place a few more leaves as well. So these are the ones that are really going to pop, and they're not going to be part of the blurry background. They're going to be, part of our subject, part of our foreground. So I am just placing basically that main stem and leaf on the large daisy. And then I kind of felt like I needed to add a little bit of darker green in some of the corners. That just gives a nice vignetting effect to my little mini painting. We can blend that out a little bit, make it a bit messy if you want. At this point, it's totally up to you. Do you need another little leaf here or there? You might want to go around the petals once again, just carefully going in and making sure that the green looks really nice and that you've done your due diligence and gotten sort of in between all the little petals. But yeah, this is coming together really nicely and quite quickly as well. I just wanted to take a moment to remind you to please hit the subscribe button. If you love this content, if you love painting along with me and exploring your creativity with me each week or twice a week now, we have a video every Tuesday and Friday. The one thing you can do to help support this channel and make these videos possible, and it doesn't cost you anything, is to hit the subscribe button. It makes such a huge difference, and we know that the majority of our viewers are not actually subscribers. So if you want to help me out, and I hope that you do, please hit the subscribe button. Our painting is looking really good, and I've got one last little tip to share as we go around the flowers with that super dark green. It's a good idea to put just a little dot of green right near the center, just in one or two spots, and it gives the look that that you can kind of see in between some of the petals, just like you would be able to in nature. And of course, I'm adding just a slight bit more of dark gray, but as I said before, that's up to you. Really think about that and decide how much is too much, because you don't want blue-gray flowers. So, but a little extra shading near the stamen can really give that beautiful, perfectly shaded, dramatic effect. Well, friends, that's almost it. We are done our Daisy mini painting. I really hope that you feel like if you've got half an hour, you can achieve this. Sometimes working small, I find, is a wonderful way to make things seem very doable and achievable. It's just this tiny little exercise that you can take on in the space of one afternoon. The final step is my favorite, and that is to remove our washi tape, revealing this beautiful, clean border. And this mini painting looks so good on that large sort of white mat framed by the watercolor paper. Thank you for watching. If you want to check out my watercolor e-course, head over to my website, shaydacampbell.com. And if you want to see more real-time content, let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe.